saw in that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it. I'm disgusted now. I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy, go into rehab. I had to ask God for his mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. But I'm committed to be a better man each and every day. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry.
Okay. Thoughts and prayers. We are here, Joel Christian Gill, Professor Joel Woods, whose specialty is Black male trauma. All right, Dr. Professor Woods.
Again, man, so I love this.
That's P. Diddy for those who didn't know. That's P.
Yeah,
Diddy
again,
apologizing
I'm
to
hearing
the
all this
world.
stuff for the first time. So, yeah, man, there's a lot of stuff that's wrong with that. Seeking therapy first and foremost. And let me just be clear: men don't go to therapy to deal with domestic violence. Domestic violence is not a mental health issue. It's an issue of power and control. And so, for example, I don't see men in private therapy that have domestic violence issues. I send their ass to, a batterer intervention program. And I say that as a person who used to run batterer intervention program. I think, as you know, that's my sort of history. So the idea that, even when it comes to trauma or pain, that will somehow lend itself into beating up a woman, that's not how it works. Majority of cats that have trauma don't beat women and all that stuff. So there's a lot of other stuff going on there. I think the thing that I just did want to say, though, is, again, just getting to the mental health aspects to it, is because the question becomes, what does actually seeing this video, what does it unleash, right, in the people who've seen it, like us, right? There's a profound sense of, we can just say the obvious, of complicity, right? That goes along with this. There's no doubt, for example, that a lot of people knew about this, not even talking about, I guess, the hotel that was paid actually to not even show it, right? So this institutional betrayal trauma that our people feel, that women feel, when they see that there's institutions that actually, abdicate and negate their responsibility to, even if it's not even to protect, but to inform people of harm, is something that we have to pay attention to. Because when we feel as if, for example, institutions don't protect us, then we, on one level just say, well, nothing else matters. Why believe in anything? And so, when you see a Black man beating a woman like that, women, for example, feel as if, those sort of ideas about what men are capable of get reinforced. When brothers, for example, who know about this and have sort of been talking about it for, years and on the sly and sort of hinting at it, but now coming out and critique, they get some sense of judgment or feel good about it. But we know that's only after the fact. This is only happening now because of the video, because there's no way to hide behind it. And I'm just saying that for the men that knew about it, for all the folks, they are just as guilty and deserving of condemnation and critique as Puffy, who was doing that in some respects. And so I want to say that what we have to be concerned about is, where do these sort of thoughts and ideas about his behavior land in the hearts and spheres of Black folks, particularly even Black children? Because again, somebody's mother, somebody's sisters are all going through that same type of thing, but we just don't talk about it, right? And when a video like this happens, Karen, this ends up in many ways really bringing all these sort of things to fore, but we just don't, again, going back to Professor Gill's vantage point, have spaces to talk about it. So there's a profound level of complicity that I think that we can't deny. As a father and as a man, for example, I'll just share with you just one of the ways, and I'll be real quick about this. And this is how bad this is, particularly for men. I have two daughters. The baby girl is 14, the oldest is 21. I had to raise my daughters to say that, look, you know what, disproportionately, domestic violence and sexual assault is underreported. Not just because of the ways in which, society kind of blames the victim and all that sort of stuff, but also because when they do report it, some of the men in their lives make bad decisions and, handle it the wrong way. We know, for example, the story of Maya Angelou. When Maya Angelou, because of her victimization, when she ended up telling somebody, that person who sexually abused her went away. And so what happened? She became self-muted, right? So she literally felt like the power of her words and naming her victim caused that person's death. And so what happens is that Black women sometimes don't even tell on their victimizers because of, what might happen,
They don't
to
want
the
their
people.
brother or their
Right.
daddy to go to
So I
jail.
had to I had to raise my daughters to say, you know what, baby, still tell your daddy. Daddy will handle it, but he won't go to jail. So I'm saying we got to do all these sort of gymnastics and stuff, but what it at the end of the day, it just implicates what role do other men play in making sure that the violence that men have on women doesn't get ignored. And that's something I would just say for our listeners, every man is implicated in this conversation because we know our partners. We know the folks that are actually doing this. And the question simply becomes, what are we doing in return?
I mean, it's the barbershop.
Yeah.
As the behavior is perpetuated in the barbershop, who's checking the men who are saying those things, right? I mean, it starts there in community, right? If you're not challenging and checking the men that are speaking these, horrific things about women, calling them bees and stuff, if you're not checking them in the moment, then when do we ever learn this? If behind closed doors in the sanctity of the barbershop is where, the most free you can be, that's when the little boys are sitting there listening. You don't agree with that, Joe?
Well, I'm just
I
saying to you, I'm saying it, and I'm gonna let this, brother jump in. We share in barbershops. We don't disclose and we don't confess. That's a myth, right? So again, unless we are intentional
I
about, I
wouldn't
mean,
know. You're right.
well, I'm
Okay.
just saying. So,
No,
so
I'm
listen,
saying I wouldn't know. You're right.
we're talking about LeBron. We're talking about, we're talking about everything except for, and maybe now in situations like this, but as this brother just said, every brother knows, hell, we grew up with it. We're not talking about the stuff that we witnessed growing up or the things that we done did. And so while on one level, the barbershop is the social, what is the social club, right? It's just not a place of confession. And I'm just saying we got to do better with it. But
Okay.
this, becomes one of those opportunities again to actually talk about complicity and perhaps even to sort of beg for this type of conversation that you're talking about on the regular.
I
On the
think
we
yeah,
do
and
have the ability to do that.
I think it's important for us to remember too, like the men need brave spaces, not safe spaces. We need spaces where we can go in and we can say those things, right? And so when I go into that situation, when I'm sitting in a room full of dudes and we're smoking cigars and drinking bourbon, right? And somebody says something homophobic, says something sexist, I put them on blast right there. I'm like, that's not a thing we're gonna do here. That's not a thing. Like I speak that in those spaces, and I think that's important for us to do in those spaces. I want to, I always tell my son, like when I retire, I'm gonna open up a barbershop. That's how I put that's how when everybody else was selling drugs when I was a kid, I was cutting hair, right? I was the dude putting Bart Simpson in the back of everybody's head. And because I can't think of anything more great is to sit in a room full of men and share like real stuff, right? Share real ideas, like and play and create that space that's the barbershop where we can talk about things that are just, I mean, let's talk about whether LeBron is the GOAT, but also let's talk about how we dealt with the death of our fathers. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, let's talk about those things too. And I think that's an important thing for men to do and to create spaces where men can do that. Like
And what I was
somebody in the table and say, I'm gonna cut your hair. I'm like, how are things? I know you lost your job. Like you good? You need somebody to talk to? Like I want to be able to do that in that space. And I think it's important for us to start having, I mean, my friends are like that, right? I call up my homies and I'm like, like I'm talking to him. He's like, like I remember one time I had a really good friend. I needed to borrow some money at a time. I was in a tough spot. And somebody like said something to me and I just broke down and he just put his hand on my shoulder. And he was like, it's okay. I got you. Yeah, I'll loan you the money. It's fine. Like just like having that space. We don't do that, right? And we need brave spaces where we can be placed, where we can be like that.
So no, I love what you just said. And the only thing that I would just want to add is for me, it's not it wouldn't be volitional, right? It has to be a part of the curriculum.
Yeah.
I'm saying, these are things that we have to be intentional about because again, everything else in our culture pushes us from not having those conversations. And I love the way in which you framed it, frank, brave versus safe. But I'm saying that, for example, as a clinician, I tell people who work with males that they have, three sort of areas that are easy sort of check areas. Men ability to provide, protect, and pleasure women, right?
Yeah.
You could just those are just three sort of categories. My clients, they name them the three F's. I can't say that on SiriusXM. But the reality is those are just three areas in many ways that you can just check in with a man to see how they're doing. because society in many ways kind of, evaluates us in those sort of three categories. And we will be foolish not necessarily to think that those are not things that we at some point don't internalize. So checking in the cat about his money, checking in the cat about his, concerns about his body, ability to be able to take care of himself. And this whole issue of whether or not, what's your relationship with women? Do you feel as if that you have the sort of, all those sort of things at every stage, right? From middle school to high school to, the book that Karen and I wrote about, because there's a difference between sex and sexuality. So if we're not being intentional about these things, and I'll just say this last thing, for men who are, I got a big part of my client population are men above 50 and men above 60. And I think I shared this with you, Karen. And these are cats that have been dealing with, hip replacement, knee replacements. Their bodies are not the same as what they were. And for us to not think that older men, are not still thinking about sex, are not thinking about morbidity or mortality or their legacy, right? Is to simply not have any sense of what really is happening in men's individual lives, right? Again, beyond the categories and all that sort of stuff, every individual brother is thinking about their job, their woman, their kids, right? Their health. But we don't have those, conversations because, again, it's just, and I would just say the last thing is this is where COVID, to a certain extent, had some benefit for Black men, is that it slowed everything down to the point where men, for the first time, were forced to deal with all those sort of secrets, those silences. Right.
Yeah.
And I would have a number of different brothers that would come in that would say to me that I've always had these questions. They're just louder now than any other point because I don't have all these sort of distractions. And that's the thing that we have to be able to deal with, are these sort of silences and spaces that men just never go to.
COVID also led to a lot of women being trapped in the house with their oppressors, sheltering in place with their abusers. Yeah, and that was, a lot of people got divorced during COVID because, the relationships were great when you could leave the house, but when you can't leave the house, you got to deal with yourself.